Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Optimized Real Estate Podcast. I'm Rod Wilson, your host, and it's my job to basically pick through some of the top strategies, ideas, approaches to the residential real estate industry. And so I talk to the movers and shakers and some of the top people in the field and basically pull out their hacks and things that you should be considering in your own real estate business. And today is actually one that I think you'll really enjoy. It gets a little in the weeds as far as building materials and whatnot. But what we cover is how to build a healthy home. And my guest is actually a repeat guest, Bo Stevens. He was formerly a environmental engineer. He ran some different product companies and was kind of, he'll call it a hobby builder. So he's been building homes for himself and for spec for a long time. And as he's learned some of the new ways of building, as well as the different building materials, and he'll even mention that he's environmentally sensitive to a lot of the bad things that are in building materials, and it was really affecting his health. And I got on this topic with him because I've known Bone for a long time, but we got on this topic because of my sleep, and he was giving me some hacks on how to improve my sleep. So anyway, some of the things we cover: dirty electricity, VOCs, EMFs. We get into water, air. I mentioned sleep. We covered more of that on the first one. And just overall kind of toxicity that resides in a lot of the building products that we've proven it affects human health, but most manufacturers don't do much about it, to be honest. And there's more and more people that are coming out, like our food supply. I feel like people are getting more in tune with how this stuff is affecting our health and focusing more on human health than profits and reducing costs and whatnot. And by the way, most of this does not increase the price for the investors and developers out there. This is not going to be a big price tag add or increase. So some of the things we talk about, he talks about the types of wood to use, windows. There's some stuff related to electricity, plumbing, insulations, and wallboard and sheetrock. There's some great alternatives to paint that actually, I believe it's even cheaper from what I remember. There's also stain, ventilation, all these things that basically can create a much better house and living environment. And what I think is interesting, and he did it on his property, the last spec deal that he did, he got a very quick sale and a really good number because he was able to market all these things. So I think for some of you that are in these highly competitive markets and you're trying to sell your product, your property, I should say, it's important to differentiate yourself. And this is one way to do it. And you can basically highlight all the things you've done differently or changed or altered that you can deem it a healthy home versus just a standard home that has all of these things, all these products and materials that basically outgas some of them for a very, very long time. One of his clients that he worked with, where they had significant mold poisoning. I think the wife was actually bedridden, healthy her whole life, did a big remodel, and then she's basically bedridden and had basically was poisoned by black mold. So that's obviously the extreme case. And then we won't even talk about, we actually mentioned it, but we're not going to focus on the liability side. So if you're a builder, developer, you can be liable for a lot of this stuff if you're putting in some of these toxic products. So that's it for now. Longer than normal intro, but you're really going to enjoy this episode. That's all for now. Hey, Bo, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good.
Good. Thanks for jumping back on. So to kind of recap from our last, by the way, everyone who's listening, go listen to the original podcast we did. It's good. And what I told Bo a minute ago is that we're going to kind of jump from what it is and why you should care, which I think he kind of outlined the things we're talking about, building the quote unquote healthy home. We talked about dirty electricity and VOCs and all the things that kind of lurk inside a new or old home. It could be either one. And obviously for my audience on the real estate side, whether it's developers, investors, even real estate agents, I mean, they're always looking for ways to, differentiate themselves, differentiate their product, which is the house. So I have a very keen interest just because I'm interested in healthy living, healthy hacks, whatever you want to call it. And so this is pretty cool because you're doing it related to building products and building homes, which hasn't been on the radar. I mean, you've got people know clean your ducts and do certain things. EMFs have become a kind of a bigger thing as far as affecting people's health. And by the way, I'll keep saying this, but go back to the other podcast. We talked about sleep and you're improving your sleep with the right sleep environment. So what we had talked about doing today for everybody who's joining is is the building process. So getting into the kind of nuts and bolts and the process that Bo goes through when building a home. And I will put together a pretty in-depth show notes after this one, but why don't we just start from what you would see as step one in the building process, Bo, and how do we build a healthy home?
Great. So what we can do is what we talked about before is talk about, let's just build a home right now. Like we'll just go through and I can discuss kind of the ways to environmentally and talk in terms of toxicity, lead you in healthy pattern and away from what might be a more toxic and unhealthy pattern. And at the same time, discussing the costs relative to those choices. And, like I was telling Rod, it really isn't that much more expensive. And
that's a huge key that I actually meant to mention that at the very beginning is for a lot of people that hear this, especially when you're either flipping houses, developing real estate or whatever, the first thing is, well, I can't do that because it costs too much. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's the huge key from last time. And just to go back to the last podcast, your example was in a $1.6 million build on the last home you did in Kauai, it was about a $15,000 to $20,000 and you thought it was quite a bit less, but worst case, $15,000 to $20,000 cost add to basically create a top to bottom healthy home.
Yeah. I mean, 1.6 actually include the lot. So the building materials were $1 million of labor and building to build that house because I contracted it myself and did some of the work myself. But that was about right. And we'll go through those numbers. And sometimes it's actually less expensive. I mean, some of the pieces are less expensive. And it's really sometimes just understanding which alternative to choose. That's out in the industry, zero VOC, non-toxic. It's like this big buzzword, but it's very inaccurate in many, many cases. And I've learned that by trial and error. There's like 35, 40 years ago, nobody really knew what a VOC was. And certainly other than an environmental engineer in the mainstay, and I wasn't one of those then, but I learned. But, if we start building a house, the first thing we're putting down is the foundation. We're digging and we're putting a foundation down. And when I was in Kauai, it was interesting because this truck pulls up and I'm like, and it was a pesticide truck. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, we're going to spray the dirt. And I'm like, for what? And they're like, for termite. And I'm like, what are you going to spray it with? And he shows me this thing that had danger. It was a herbicide, right? And I said, well, okay, but we're going to pour concrete into that ground. It's a post and pier foundation, right? And I'm like, what? They're going to come through the concrete? And is there another alternative? And certainly there was. We could have used borate, which is boric acid, right? So like right at the beginning, we're talking about a dirt lot, right? And the guy wants to just literally wholesale spray this nasty herbicide in 20-mile-an-hour winds. So I said, leave. And I went and we sprayed borate all over it.
Not to mention what that does to the soil and the water and everything else.
He goes, it was so much. I asked him how much he was going to do. And I'm like, whoa. He was going to just do everything. I'm like, wait, we have a garden over there, an organic garden on the plans. I mean, that's 5 years from now that we're not going to be able to eat out of it. Nobody would have known.
Wow.
Nobody would have known. It's not in part of the building permit process. Nobody checks it. And certainly when the permit guy came a year later and said, did you do your termite spray? I said, yeah, because I did borate. He didn't ask me what I used, but here's what's interesting about that. So the wood in Hawaii, it's mandated, but yet they don't mandate it. I'll explain that. On your building permit, it says you must use borate treated lumber because the termites are so vociferous there. Like California, we think we have termites. They're a joke. I mean, every house in Kauai, before they were done building the house, had to be tented, except for mine. Every single one on the island, the inspector came and he goes, yeah, well, have you tented your house yet? And I said, no, there's no termites. We checked for termites. There's nothing. And it's because I used everything that was safe, non-toxic, but also termites wouldn't eat, which is borate impregnant. So humans can tolerate boric acid. We can't tolerate herbicides, but we can tolerate boric acid, but the termites cannot. So they literally make you impregnate the lumber. But yet, so I asked the inspector, I said, why, if you guys are mandating borate lumber, why do they have termites? He's like, well, nobody really uses it. It's too expensive. And it cost me $10,000 on the job over all my lumber to do that lumber. That's not expensive on a $800,000 of building materials. Like, it's going to last forever. And he's like, and I said, what? But you mandate it. What does that mean? And he said, yeah, that's just Hawaii. We just put it on the thing and they're too lazy, right? So
yeah, I wonder how many yards are infected with all that toxic, spray, and people don't even know.
I had never built it before. So anyways, talking about foundations, let's start there. So you have your slab foundations and you have your raised foundations, which would be post and pier. You could do a concrete block raised foundation, together, which is hollow tile. And I'm just a real fan of airflow. And if you raise your house just a little bit, I mean, crawl space, right? Not dig it down necessarily, but I mean, in some areas like hurricane areas, you certainly have to sink your piers way low, but you don't necessarily have to dig down, but you get natural airflow. And that airflow can be designed, and I'll explain later in this podcast, that the air that's coming through, if you have any breeze or any wind at any time, moving air will come through your flooring. It'll cool your house. It'll ventilate your house. It'll dry your house out. It'll prevent mold, just the airflow. And the house that I'm going to tell you about how we designed, it was all about controlling airflow and making sure we had it.
And so, this was not a slab then?
I did in Hawaii. I visited 50 slab homes, and all 100% of them had mold. And the reason is because the concrete traps moisture. It can't not.
Interesting.
You can put all your visqueen and your moisture trap. It doesn't matter. Eventually, it's going to break down, and that water is going to come, or it's going to condensate in there on the top of that concrete, right? And concrete is porous, and so you end up with moisture in your house. That's why basements smell, because they're concrete piered, dug into ground that gets wet because they're below the water table, and the water goes right through. Even though they're not dry humidity wise. So we started with that process, with making sure we had a raised foundation. And then the first thing you do when you have your foundation is you start building your subfloor. You start building your joists in your subfloor. And there are counties that make you use copper sulfate pressure treated subfloor wood. And that is truly poisonous. And it doesn't last any longer than the borate treated, which is local to everyone, but people just don't know it exists. So
never heard of it, honestly.
Because it exists, but you have to order it, right? So it's like in California, we have it. Like Home Depot carries it. You just have to ask. So I had to order lots of materials over there, but in Hawaii, they have it localized. And so I prefer that because, typically with a copper sulfate, you're not necessarily touching it, but they're sawing it, they're cutting it, and it also outgasses. It's a poison. That's what it's to do. It's to kill and also maintain your integrity for moisture. But then you lay down your subfloor, right? So the three choices of subfloor that people mostly will use, probably only two, is OSB or a CDX type material, some kind of 1.1 inch. Well, in Hawaii, it's only 3/4 because they don't have earthquake, but some kind of plywood, waterproof exterior plywood. Lots of people think that exterior plywood, because it's treated for moisture, right? The glue is actually more toxic than interior plywood. And it's the opposite. Interior plywood is treated with phenol formaldehyde, which is urea formaldehyde. I said it backwards. I apologize. Urea formaldehyde, and exterior plywood is treated with phenol formaldehyde. Phenol lasts 30 days, 100% out, zero toxicity, better waterproofer. Urea, 20 years. It literally outgasses so slow because it's water-based. So,
and this is like
plywood.
The dumb question is sheetrock, paint, all that doesn't matter. You're still going to get the effects of that outgassing?
Well, you're not sheetrocking your floor.
Okay, well, you put whatever your floor material is on top of that, it's still you're going to get the effects, or?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because unless you tile your whole house, you put wood down, air travels through the wood. I mean, pour a bucket of water on your wood floor and it's going to go through. It's not completely water preventative, right? So if water goes, air can way easier travel than water. So yes, the subfloor will come up, but it's also go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's not more expensive is what you're saying.
No.
So this is one of those things where I'll keep chiming in and just saying, like, this is something you can market and advertise. It's not just about like being a good guy and building a healthy home, although I think it's important that we should be doing that. But for the investors and developers out there, I mean, this is something that you can market. We'll get into your house in Kauai, and I've talked to other people about, being able to say that you've done these things, and you get, two buyers on, or I should say you have two houses that are for sale. The one that has all these little, tweaks and materials that are thought through and are going to, impact human health less is the one that's going to sell.
I think absolutely. I mean, that's how I marketed my house, but I marketed my house because that was the truth, but I was the only one on the island. So it made a big difference. I mean, we had 50 people come in the first hour, sold it in an hour. We didn't market. I hadn't even finished the house. We just put it on with dirt lot, and it wasn't even close to finish because I knew I was going to sell at that point. And we just had somebody, commit at whatever we asked. It didn't upbid. I didn't care. We just made a price, happy with it. They gave it to us. We built the house and finished it.
Okay, so I interrupted you. So the foundation.
So now we're in the flooring. So we got that. I'm just saying, there's OSB can be cheaper in some places than CDX. It's not always CDX. It's not. OSB so it's just a bunch of pieces of board with a ton of glue in it, right? And it tends to not handle. they thought it would handle water. Well, in Kauai, you can't even use it. It just like bends. It's bent because it can't handle the moisture. So they don't even use it over there. It's like particle board after a while. So, but OSB is a cost reduction feature in a house, but I don't consider it one because everybody forever has always used like a regular, plywood, exterior plywood flooring. And I'm just saying, stick with it. There's nothing wrong. And it's actually safer than the plywood that you're going to be using in your cabinets, which we'll talk about later, which is always massively toxic.
Okay.
So now the flooring that you put down does make a difference. So now we're going to finish that at the end because we're not flooring now. And you're framing the house. So you frame your house. You can, if you're worried about, in California, it's very common that you frame your house and they come in and they spray borate on all the timbers, on all the framing. They spray it after. Well, think about that. They're spray, and it's good. I mean, but think about it. It's not impregnated. It's not internal. It's just sitting on the surface. It's like dust, right? It's moisture, dust. And it's, they literally just spray the whole house, but right after they're done with it. And they've had great success with that, with not having to, tent houses anywhere near as quickly. But the borate treated lumber it's cheaper than doing that for one.
Right.
And it's better doing it. So now you're framing your house. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, we'll get to electrical and plumbing in a little bit, but we're going to get to windows. And window design makes a big difference in a house, whether you're going casement or double hung or slider windows. The slider is typically the lowest version of a window in terms of aesthetics, and the casement is the most expensive, or awning window style. And I love those windows, but if you can get into a double hung window and you're in an area that has seasons, you can control the temperature in your house much better. And if there's moisture, if you're in a wet area like Florida or, some places in Texas or Hawaii or any of those places, I used double hung windows. You leave the bottom window done, because you go out to the beach for 3 hours and it rains 2 inches, right? You can't leave your windows open. Your whole house would be wet because there's wind. But if your awnings are far enough out, your overhangs are far enough out, and you crack that top window, you always have airflow running through your house. And I built my house without air conditioning, and it was never hot. Even if it was 90 degrees outside, my house was 78 degrees inside with airflow, and I could control the temperature of the house with those windows. So, vinyl windows, wood windows, clad windows, those are the style of windows. Personally, I think if you bake on your finished exterior product and pre-prime your interior product, you are at first of all, it's cheaper. That's way less expensive because a painter is going to come in, and nowadays a really good painter, and have to paint the sash on a window times 40. You're going to pay, my ex-neighbor, who Rob Chapman, he just painted his house. He built and designed. It's a beautiful craftsman home. $50,000 to interior paint, repaint. That's not new bill. $50,000. That's a big number because every sash, right? But if you have a pre-baked prime, then you don't have to go into the weather stripping. So those are some secrets. But window design, I think, is a really big deal. Let's talk about the electricity, because that's the major component of this. Most houses, let's just do it this way. Residentially, every house is wired with Romex, vinyl sleeved wiring. That vinyl sleeved wiring does nothing to inhibit the electrical field that comes through the wiring. Nothing. Minuscule amount for us. 110 volts is traveling through that wiring. We use alternating current here. In our cars, we have direct current. It doesn't change. Alternating current means that it's changing current depending upon the appliance that can pull less or more. And what happens is it's still shoving 110 volts through that line. Where does that extra go? Well, that's dirty electricity, and that's leaking voltage into your house. So I clad this is where I spent my money. It cost me $2,000 in building materials to do it this way. I used metal clad or MC cable, which is what they use in commercial buildings mandatorily. You cannot use Romex in a commercial building because of fire, because the vinyl Romex, a rat can eat it. But the real reason that Europe uses it, even in their residential, is because they have 220 volts. The rat, they don't have fire, it kills people, right? So they use commercial wiring inside. But the benefit of that is it blocks 100% of the radiation that's coming through that line in terms of dirty electricity and in terms of voltage leak, which we measure on our body. So everybody remembers the electric blanket in the 70s, and nobody remembers where they went. Well, there was a $1 trillion class action lawsuit because everybody was sleeping in a volt and a half minimum in their bed at night. So a car battery is 12 volts, that will kill you. But why would you want to sleep in a volt and a half? It's pricking you all night long, and it's certainly not, it's inflammatory. So why would you want to do that? No wonder we have sleep issues. So they went away quietly because that lawsuit got settled, and you can buy them from China, but you don't have a U.S. manufacturer because they all went under. So when we're sleeping in our bedrooms and we have our Romex wiring with our 2-prong cables, like we talked about in the last podcast, we're sleeping in volts, like more than one. I go into every house, I can measure volts on people's body. I mean, and they don't know. You put in MC cable. So the European Physicians for Safer Health and Technology, it's tens of thousands of physicians around the world, they spec 300 millivolts or less for a healthy person, a person without any EHS, environmental hypersensitivity, or electrical hypersensitivity. They call it both. I'm one. I'm an EHS person. I believe Rod is too. But it's supposed to be like less than 50 millivolts for those of us like this. Well, in a house, I'm going to measure volts on you, not millivolts, volts. So let's think about that. So that's like 10 times or 5 times what you should be in. My bedroom in my house with that cabling is 35 to 40 millivolts.
And it's basically, it's how many millivolts is it? Not to get in the weeds too far, but I'm curious, how many millivolts would you say is the average house is kind of pumping into the...
Well, it depends on where you are in the house and what appliance is pulling, and you measure it on the body. Like, it doesn't matter what's in the air. It's what our body grounds it, like grounding you to ground. So easily a volt. And with Romex, by the way, the lowest you can even get potential wise, like I can fix everything in the house, but since remember that vinyl leaks, is 300 millivolts. The lowest you can get.
Wow.
That's not bad, but that's the perfectly healthy person who doesn't also have 4 and 5G wireless running through his house and doesn't have dirty electricity, blah, blah, blah. So once we've tacked onto this, I believe pretty much everybody is sensitive, which is why we have these sleep issues. Like everybody. Like you just don't even talk to people. What do they talk now? It's like, how'd you sleep? It's like the biggest question anybody says in the morning, right?
Oh, yeah. Sleep has been an epidemic. You know, the lack.
It's not like, hey,
so we're going to lose the entire audience here if we go too much deeper. But basically, in layman's terms, without, the shielding or the metal clad or the MC cable, basically your system is getting, I'll use the word attacked, but it's not really attacked, but your system basically, it's just a constant kind of pinging dirty electricity on your body.
Your system is excited when it wants to sleep.
There you go.
Right. And when we want to sleep, the term now from doctors, right? The hot term is rest and digest. That's what the country talks about now. That's the new term is when you're sleeping, you should be resting and digesting. Well, you can't rest when you're excited.
And so would you just do that? I mean, if you're really trying to stay on the cheap, because this does cost extra and you got to kind of think through it. And by the way, I'm going to get Bo to provide kind of a list of all this stuff for us. But would you want to just do your bedrooms, or is it just not even worth the effort? Just do the whole house. It sounds like for a couple grand on $1 million build, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer.
Okay, so the couple grand is the material cost, extra material cost. To buy the rolls of MC cable, you have to use metal boxes instead of plastic because you have to ground it all the way back to ground, right? So it was about $2,000 in extra wiring. But yes, you could, but then you have labor on top of that. But you're running wiring anyway in a new house.
Right.
So that's nothing different, right? You're already running it. So I recommend doing the whole thing. But I mean, yes, the answer is, where do you spend your time? Your bedroom, your office, your living room, your kitchen, maybe. There's all kinds of other lights in your hallway, in your bathroom. I mean, if you're spending too much time in your bathroom, there's something wrong, right? So you could cut some money doing that easily. But if you're going to say your house is, and you can still say your house is healthy because you're spending time. When I go into houses and I'm remodeling, it's very difficult to run the MC cable. You Swiss cheese your house.
Right.
So we target what the problem is. And we typically don't get into the MC cable range unless somebody wants to spend some money because it's expensive to remodel it that way.
And then just, I know you covered on the last one, but you can go in and test room by room, what on a remodel, you can see where the problem spots are.
Easy.
Yeah.
And I'm actually writing a book about it where I'm giving away those secrets to people because I want them to be able to identify these problems in their house by themselves. Everybody can do a lot. I mean, low hanging fruit. It just takes a little bit of knowledge how to use the meters and equipment, but they're not rocket science. Believe me, they're not that difficult. Once you understand what you're looking at and explain to you, it's 5 minutes to learn the equipment, 10 minutes to learn all of the equipment and then use it. It's really not that big of a deal. And you save the work that I do for people that, because there's going to be things in, especially houses that are already built, like what do I do now?
Right.
Going into better sleep and all that. So moving along into the house build, when the electrician's there, right? What else is there? The plumber's there, right?
Right.
So at this time, we're going to talk about water. We're going to talk about plumbing. And, PEX is a real common thing that people are using, but you're in an area where you have high rat content. If you have a lot of rats, that's a tough one. People try to stay away from copper because of the cost, but I like copper for that reason alone. And PEX, I don't like drinking hot water through that PEX line because you're heating plastic, right? But you can get around that by putting in a water system in your house, a whole house system that does two things. One, it has something like zinc in it so it doesn't mold, because that's the problem with whole house water systems. They filter, but when the filter media gets impacted, mold grows in the bacteria that's in there, right? I mean, it's sitting in there. It's bad. They're really bad. So there's a guy in the Midwest that created this water system that installs just like anything else, but he was smart enough to put zinc oxide in it, which we eat zinc oxide. People that take zinc pills, or you want zinc when you're sick,
Right.
that's zinc oxide. So now it's in your water, and it's not a bad thing. And that's enough to keep the mold from growing. So his filters have two types of sanitization that we use in the US, chlorine, and then sometimes they add ammonia. In Southern California, they add ammonia. It's called chloramine. People don't even know. It's so dangerous to have chloramines in your water. I mean, that's ammonia. Ammonia is way worse than chlorine. It's higher on the chart, of the periodic chart. That's why we have ammonia-free Windex, right? They use vinegar, right? So imagine having it in your water that you're bathing in, and it absorbs through your skin because it's the biggest gland. So really difficult to get chloramine out of water. He developed a really great system, and it doesn't mold, and it lasts, like, instead of changing your reverse osmosis system every 6 months, it's a year, and your whole house system can go 3 to 5 years, which is a really long time for us.
What's the cost of that, roughly?
They're really inexpensive. I mean, forget the plumber, because the plumber is going to have to cut. I mean, I did my own. They weren't that hard to do, but like $600-700 for the whole house, for a 3,000 square foot house.
Well, people don't think about this. Everyone, I've had an RO system. I've got on the whole bandwagon with the hydrogen lately, but way back in the day, it was like alkaline water, that machine.
Yeah.
So I've always been in the drinking water, but I've had docs tell me, like you said, I mean, the water that you're bathing and showering in is just as important because you're absorbing all of it. So
yeah. So, but anyways, in terms of the plumbing systems, those are the types of things that you think about when you're building a house. I mean, you put in a water system like that's not more expensive than another water system, but it's not soft water. The thing about soft water is you're taking the minerals out. I mean, that's the good thing about minerals. They go into your skin, and we need them, and we absorb them. And that's why we need alkaline water, but you don't need so much if you're bathing in the ocean, by the way.
Right.
You don't. But you take all that out, and then you put a reverse osmosis system. It lowers the pH so low that you can only really drink that water when you're eating, because you want acidic water when you're eating. But when you're exercising, you want high pH water. So this guy makes us, like everybody does, you can put a mineral cartridge into your RO system, and that way you're mineralizing your water to however high you want your pH to be. You can tailor it, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, whatever you want, by how much, the Remin cartridge is. So that, though, you put that in a house, and now you have healthy water. We lifted up the house to start healthy air, right? And the next thing about that is talking about insulation. And, there's all types of different insulation. I am a big, huge proponent of wool insulation. It's hydroscopic, which means it does not absorb water. It does not condensate. You can look up like fiberglass insulation, and you can get 2 different answers on the internet, whatever you want, whoever's paying for the ad.
Right.
But it condensates and it molds. It doesn't have mold because it's plastic, but it doesn't dry out because it's plastic. But mold is actually antifungal, antibacterial. That's what wool is. That's just by its nature. So bacteria doesn't grow on it, and moisture doesn't grow on it, so you can't have mold. So, and it insulates easily, in my opinion, double what fiberglass does. It's denser. What's the cost of that? That's what you're going to ask.
Yep.
It's going to cost you $2,000 in your house extra. $2,000 materials. You have to.
Is that harder to get? Is wool?
Every Home Depot has rock wool.
You're kidding. I didn't know that.
No.
Okay.
But it is more expensive because but here's the thing. I just laugh when people so you have to strap wool in the ceiling. And the reason is because I have no idea in my mind why anybody would put paper on insulation. So your walls get more, why? Because so you can staple to it, right?
Right.
But it's paper. And paper does absorb water, and then mold grows on your insulation. It's worse than the fiberglass in and of itself. You can't have paper, which is the backing of sheetrock, by the way. We'll talk about that next. So I love wool insulation. You're going to be in an environment that's more like a cooler. It stays one temperature. You can use concrete foam. It's really hard to find. That's blown in concrete, and it expands, and it's literally like a concrete foam in your wall, and your house will be an igloo. I have it in my house, and I tried it, but it's not cheap. That's a $20,000 upgrade. But I mean, if you live in an area that's like super freezing or super hot, that would work. But I still like wool better because it's cheaper and it's readily available, and you throw it in. You don't need any big solution. But that's just talking about the highest end solution. So now we got our house built. it's wired, it's plumbed, right? And we got our insulation and we're about ready to put our wallboard on in the interior. Let's talk about exterior first before we do that. You have paneling, you have stucco, you have shingles. What we end up doing is painting your house, right? And you paint your house with an enamel, gloss paint, or whatever it does. And we seal our house really well so it doesn't breathe. So I'm a real proponent of using Tyvek on the outside of walls because it breathes one way. It doesn't allow moisture in, breathes out. And having rock or wood houses, because like a slatted house, like a lap siding house or a plantation style house, everything does get caulked up and it does prevent moisture from coming in, which is what you need. And that's fine as long as the ventilation is coming underneath the house and into the house. But I really like rock homes for the matter is that rock does breathe and you don't have to seal it or paint it. So it's really, it's really a really good choice. Brick, rock, all those types of things. I mean, they're more expensive to finish on a house, but how much more expensive over 50 years or 40 years if you're not painting it?
Well, going back into from a developer, investor perspective, knowing you're not going to do a rock house, I mean, on the lower end, it's the typical siding, right? Is that problematic or is it just a matter of just, sealing it and painting it with quality paint?
Our podcast cut out for a little bit. So the last part, paint the what?
Okay, the rock obviously would be on the kind of higher end.
Yeah.
So what about on the lower end?
So I like Hardy Plank a lot, and that's a concrete fiberboard. But the best thing that anybody's come out with is magnesium oxide board, which we're going to talk about as a replacement on the interior. But they make it for subfloor and they make it for exterior. So it's very similar to a wood panel siding, breathes really well, but it's super non-toxic. Like you can eat magnesium, we all do, and it won't mold. It won't rot, it won't degrade, and termites can't eat it. It's as good as having a concrete wall, in my opinion. But I like Hardy board too. Hardy board really paints really well because it comes pre-primed and glue just sticks to it. I mean, paint just sticks to it like glue, like really, really, really well. In some areas, Hardy board is not more expensive than ugly T111, which is just, basically flat sheet with grooves in it, right? It can be less expensive. So, but getting into the inside, well, almost all houses, right, are sheetrocked, right? And sheetrock, just to go over it, has two sides. One side they're both paper, but one side is kind of almost a water-resistant paper to handle the wet mud. Because if you put it backwards and you put wet mud on the back side of that single-faced paper, it's going to mold instantly. Most sheetrock is shipped in areas where it's not perfectly covered and comes with moisture content into it that the mold's already growing. Just saying, you may not be able to see it, but you can smell it. I hate the product. And magnesium oxide board is our future. They make magnesium oxide board is just not made prevalent enough in the United States for us to get it enough. But there is a manufacturer called Forever Board, and he did a house for me, a test house for me, and it's great stuff. It costs about the same as sheetrock. So there you go. You can dip magnesium oxide board. They've done 20-year accelerated tests. It cannot mold because the pH is so high, the mold won't grow. You can screw 1/8 inch from the edge, which try that with sheetrock. It's just going to break. So, and it's not any heavier and it's not any more expensive. It's not even funny. But so those are a must to be in a bathroom or any wet area, laundry room, bathroom, kitchen. And if you're not going to use magnesium oxide board, you just do not put sheetrock in a bathroom. The sheetrock that they're putting in bathrooms has, you got your purple, your green board. That's literally the same damn sheetrock, and they've sprayed a herbicide on it. Again, toxic to outgas, toxic when they're cutting it, breathing it in your house, but it's paper still. It's stupid. And I've pulled off so many of those things in mold remediations, and there's just mold growing all over it with the biocide. And the funny thing about that is the sheetrock back of it has that thin paper single face, and it's facing the interior wall, which has the plumbing. Like, right. I don't even understand, right? I mean, so they face the top side, which you put mud and paint on it, and that protects it from you get some water or moisture on it from the bathroom humidity, right? But what's happening when you have a plumbing leak on the backside? And if you had magnesium oxide board, you don't have to tear it off like you do sheetrock. You drill a hole in it, you put air in it, it dries out. The wood's going to dry out if it's, only a couple days in. You pull out the insulation. Well, actually, if your insulation's wool, nothing molds. You could just think about the cost savings, and it is a cost savings. When we just finished my house to the point where we were plumbing the water in Kauai. So we had temporary water, and now we're plumbing our full water system in our main line. I hadn't done anything but work 100-hour weeks for 9 months, and it was a swell. And I drove to the west side, thought I'd take an afternoon for 2 hours, and I get a call, Bo, you got to come back. The house is flooded.
I thought that was the reason you built over there so you could surf every day.
I know, but nobody showed up. I had to do more work than I thought. I did kind of surf at night. Sometimes I surfed it like by full moon. It's crazy. But I come back and the guy was hanging the cabinets in the garage over the laundry room, and he drilled a hole that hit a knot and hit the water system, which over there, they don't run copper all the way through. They run copper into the house through, and then when you get into the walls, they run PEX. So he hit PEX line. But there was a bathroom there and a closet there. Thank God it had magnesium oxide. I didn't do the whole house because we couldn't get enough, because the guy couldn't make enough. So I did all the wet areas. And this happened to be in, well, the wet area because there was plumbing running through it, right?
Right.
We just pulled that panel off, boom, pulled my insulation out. I didn't even replace it. I put it out in the sun. It dried out. We put a dehumidifier in there. And the next day, I put back the magnesium oxide board and we were moving.
Wow.
That would have been a $10,000 mistake if it would have been sheetrock. I would have had to tear out all the closets and everything. But because it was magnesium oxide board, I didn't have to tear anything out except for where the leak was.
You
So
know what? I wouldn't consider myself a builder, but I've been around real estate enough. This is stuff I just didn't know. I mean, you know, when you deal with, I've dealt with plenty of leaks and moldy remediation and whatnot, and the paper sheetrock, it seemed ridiculous, but you know, we thought that's all there was. So
that's all there is. And so there are so many builders that you and I both know, and everybody else that are better builders than I am. I mean, I'm a hobby builder, but I train these guys now on materials. Like, and they say the same thing They're like, and some of them get angry. They're like, well, this is what we've been using for 30 years. I'm like, that doesn't make it right.
yeah, right. Well, and you automatically think anything like this would be a quote unquote upgrade, meaning cost more. For a homeowner, it might be one thing, right? If you're sensitive to stuff and whatever, you want to do this healthy home. But for an investor, developer type person, I mean, any extra dollar you spend is going to be, at least you perceive it to be, one less dollar of profit on the back end. But in this case, it's minimal add. In fact, some of them are actually going to save you money.
Yeah. You know, for like an interim product that I like in bathrooms too, is if you can't get magnesium oxide board, Georgia Pacific makes a board called Dense Armor Plus. It's fiberglass instead of paper, right? That's all the difference is. In a wet area, you know, if you get a little spill on it, right, it will dry. And I know earlier in this cast, I said fiberglass can mold, but fiberglass can dry as well if you get it dry. That flat panel is not the same thing as a chunk of insulation that is just porous, big, you know, it's like cotton candy, right?
Right.
You're going to get the water out of that, right? But on a surface, it will dry easy on a flat surface. So I really like it. Cost-wise, about 50% more material cost than regular sheetrock. Not the green and purple board, maybe only 30. So, you know, I mean, again, in the house, I put dense armor in some of the places we couldn't get the mag board shipped over, and $800 of material cost for having that. And if I hadn't done that, I would have had a $10,000.
Right, exactly. Paid for itself.
It was a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Right.
So now we got our wiring in, we're plumbing in, we have put wallboard in the appropriate areas. We have insulation that doesn't mold. We have wallboard that doesn't mold. And you know, we're going to talk about flooring and trim, tiling and things of that nature. Going into trim, most of the pre-prime trim is using a water-based prime. And although they're volatile organic compounds in a primer, there's a lot less than others. And they do outgas before the person moves in. So, but the paint itself that's sitting on top of that is different. But they do make these pressboard waterproof trim for bathrooms, and they're awful. They test high formaldehyde. They're literally pressboard, and everybody sells them. And they look nice on the outside, but they mold when water gets on them. They're waterproof. You're paying extra for these. So if I was going to put trim in something, you know, my first choice would be, let's just talk about a bathroom. You know, sheetrock doesn't belong in that bathroom. So you know, and this is where you're going to spend your money. You're going to spend your money, a little bit of money. You're already going to use, you know, a cement board behind your tile anyway. That's not spending more money. Nobody puts tile up on top of sheetrock anymore, but it happened 40 years ago.
Right.
Right. So that's not increased money. Right. But your floor should not be wood in a bathroom. It should be LVL, which is luxury vinyl plank, which is waterproof. It has a membrane backer if you're going inexpensive. You can run the house right into the bathroom, which gives you a sealed membrane. You can run it right into the tub, right into the sinks, and you do really good trim pieces around that. So that's your lower end inexpensive solution. That is $2 a foot. And it's beautiful. They make long wood planks, but it's nice to stand on. But there's higher end homes that I'm seeing now have this because, especially in humid areas, I mean, wood buckles.
Right.
You can't control. right? And nobody wants to stand
What is
on
that called again? What is that?
LVL, luxury vinyl plank. And there's
Okay.
different companies, but you have to get one that's got, like really high carb 2, which is the compliance, which is the VOC ratings. I like Life Proof from Home Depot. Shocking. I like the product. I've tested it over and over again in houses. You pull it out of the box, you let it acclimate for a day, the smell is gone. And I mean registered gone on a meter. No volatile organic compounds in that because it's recycled material going in, right? And the membrane makes it so easy. You don't have to lay a membrane over your subfloor because it's on the back of the damn thing. It's the least expensive, good-looking flooring there is. You step up into hardwood, you step up into tile, but the bathroom should have that or tile. And so, but, you start widening your mortar joints to make it look nice. Your mortar has to be sealed. Now, they do make non-sealed mortar. I mean, mortar than not to be sealed anymore. I just don't know how well it really behaves after 10 years. But you want butt-jointed, very tiny mortar seal, like 1/8 inch or less, because that's where your water is going to get down into your subfloor. Where the LVL, it's a snap overlap. That water's not going down. I mean, I'm sure if you poured 5 gallons on there, you'd have to pull it up. But you can put the floor back down. It's not even ruined. Tile, you can't even get to it.
Right.
So I like tile in the bathrooms, and I like it coming up in a wainscot or in the walls. So where you're going to spend your money is what are you going to do above the tile on the walls, and what are you going to do in the ceiling? Because the only thing protecting you from mold and moisture is a coat of paint. So if you use Dense Armor Plus, you got more than a coat of paint, right? You got the actual fiberglass lining on the sheetrock, which is still sheetrock drywall, but it's got a waterproof membrane on the outside, which prevents it from getting into the studs and all that. If you have magboard, you don't have to worry about it at all, or you tile all the way up. But, you go into so many houses. I just did a house last year. They spent $1 million to remodel 3,000 square feet and didn't add a square foot. So do the math. That's a lot. What? I mean, it was Italian marble brought in from Italy, right?
Right.
And the house had mold in a year. And so the contractor called me, and she's like, and I know her really well because I was part of this coalition I was starting down in Southern California, this healthy building coalition, but they wanted it to make it like, I don't know, all of a sudden we had chiropractors and doctors there. And I'm like, no, it's, and people it was like everything but building. And I'm like, I just wanted it to be some small little scope, right? So I left that, but she was in that, and, $800 a foot or $1,000 a foot for that's just gutting the house and redoing it, right? And so I went in the house and had looked down, and they had put that waterproof trim around the shower. But I walked into the shower, which had a pivot door, alcove, and I looked at, and there was a freaking window in the shower, right? Which is, that happens in old days, but it was a wood window. And I went, why? And then I looked up, and here's the ceiling, there's sheetrock on it, and a fan in there, and a sheetrock and paint in an alcove shower but they didn't have the window open ever. And so I said, how often do you run this exhaust fan? And they said, never. And I went, so you're sitting in an alcove with one little 30-inch door with paper on the ceiling, a fan that's not running, a wood window that's not open, and you got plastic trim around here, and it's cracking. And I said, guaranteed on the outside of your shower, when you open that pivot door, it's moisture dripping on that ground and on that ledge. And you pull that up, there's going to be mold. I didn't know it would be Stachybotrys, which is black mold, or Chaetonium, which is black mold, but it was. These people were so sick, they had to retire, and they put their entire life, they were scientists, they put their entire life savings in this house, and they were both neurologically sick. His wife was 71 years old, had never been sick in her life. She was bedridden from mold. Didn't even know she had mold. So I bring in an allergist.
Or where it came from. They're like, no one ever thinks to leave the house.
The trim was peeling. It was cracking, brand new. And they brought me in, and the contractor's like, yeah, isn't it? And the bathroom and the inside the shower was solid marble, right? That was beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't do the super basic part. So he goes, what's the fix? And I said, pull out the trim, pull out the wall. We got to hermetically seal your bedroom. And the worst part is there was not even a door to the bedroom. So they were sleeping in it because it was a walk-in bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
So they were just living, breathing in this mold. And so I said, hermetically seal, full mold containment, pull it out. And they're like, well, how are we going to fix it? And I said, we're going to pull the window out. You're going to put glass block in there for light. It'll be nice. But, we have to cover that hole. You're not going to rip up the whole wall.
Great idea.
We're going to take the ceiling down. I'm going to give you the magboard in my garage that I have saved. We're going to magboard that ceiling. We're going to put a timer on your exhaust fan so that you don't have a choice because the light's connected to that timer. And when you go take a shower, it runs an hour after and you don't have to think about it. How much that timer cost? $6.95. And so they look at me like, and then they of course looked at the contractor and they were not happy. I wasn't trying to make her look bad. I was just like, and so they go, well, how are we going to treat the outside of the shower now that there's wood trim because there's moisture there because there's no ventilation. I said, you're gonna find that marble and cut a piece, and that's gonna cost you. I mean, that cost them like $3,000, but they didn't pay for it. The contractor had to do it all, right? So I said, you're gonna make a piece of marble, and you're gonna bulldoze that marble and route it. It's gonna be beautiful, and it's gonna match the inside of the shower. You're just gonna bring the marble out and trim it. So I just designed the whole bathroom all over again, and which I'm not a designer, your wife is, but it's not that hard to do. And it looked beautiful. And then we got mold clearance, but it's like people, they're putting all the money into these things, but they're not using proper building materials.
Into the wrong places. So you made me think of something. What's the liability for that contractor? I mean, not to bring up kind of a negative point, but it's real. And I've worked with and dealt with enough contractors to where you got that whole 10-year tail of once you install and you got ambulance chasing attorneys and everybody else. This just seems like a no-brainer.
So these people are salt of the earth. They were neat people. And so she was lucky because their liability is that they got sick. Doctors would have testified they got mold in their house once I gave them a mold report that showed they have mold in their house, and she had just gutted the house. She was 100% liable, which is why she was there fixing it at her cost. But she got lucky that he didn't. I mean, this affected their life. I mean, they were sick, badly sick. And so that liability is too scary for you to think about.
No, I've been around enough people with mold poisoning, and it's extremely serious. And, your whole system, your immune system for sure, is just completely out of whack. So obviously that can create other issues. And it's one of those things that's very, very difficult to get rid of.
Imagine, and it's even harder the older you are.
Right.
Your system is a violent detox.
Well, I wonder, you and not to get going a total rabbit hole on this, but how many older people are just, struggling with whatever the ailment is. And it's like, I hate to think of how many homes are just basically killing them quickly.
Yeah, I find I'm just an average guy, really, that's had a lot of experience, but I go into these houses, and every single time I go into a house, it's like I can find mold if I want to.
Wow.
If I want to, if I'm looking, I'll find it.
So I think that's another great kind of motivator for, builders and developers to start thinking about this stuff. It's like, obviously I'm talking about like the front end, the sales, increase your profits, sell for more, do all that, be able to market and differentiate yourself. But I think on the other side of the coin is really just kind of liability and protecting yourself against someone coming back.
Well, there's the do the right thing.
And then that's obviously, that overrides all of this.
Then there's which unfortunately we have a world that cares more about profit. But if you just care about profit, it's smart.
Exactly.
If you care about profit, and that's all your business model is about, then you'd want to protect yourself by building. And when we were young, more commonly, the builders were just good. And now it's hard to find one.
Well, and the materials, the materials were better. They weren't as toxic as they are now.
Well, that I have to contend with. I think today speaking, they're way less toxic, but there was a period between when we were young and then 10, 15 years ago that they were.
Was that the TV dinner phase that we went through from?
Yeah. That was bad. I mean, but people would use butylene, and I mean, they would use tar paper in your house. I mean, you had tar paper in your walls, in your breathing walls, like tar paper, like tar. We were driven by somebody tarring in a tar truck. That's sitting live in many houses in the 40s and 50s. That's what they waterproofed houses, not Tyvek, tar. So
yeah, you could smell it. You could smell it a block away.
And yet it's in your house. Well, it's not outside the house. It's between the wallboard on the outside wallboard. It's right outside the studs. So you have, your house wall, the interior is not it's not airtight. You have outlets that have little covers on them, right? You look around, there's all kinds of air in there that's coming right into your house. All that stuff, whatever's behind your wall is in your house. You can't.
At 15 years old, I was tearing off asbestos roofs. So
there you go.
We didn't know much.
You said more toxic today, but I think it was more. We've done a lot of good things, but the paints were we had lead paint.
Okay, I don't know. Did you mention paint?
We haven't got there yet.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
We were just talking about flooring, and I was going to finish with wood flooring and say, 10 years ago, these vinyl floors, they were really dangerous. When we were kids, they were really dangerous. Polyvinyl chloride is a bad thing. It outgasses for years. It's got hard vinyl, doesn't outgas like soft vinyl, but shower curtains and flooring. And so it's important when you're using vinyl flooring that you are getting something that's been tested, like a LifeProof flooring, to be not emitting. But wood, we used lacquer, and lacquer is great when it cures, but it's soft. When it heats up, it outgasses again forever. So they came up with acrylic coatings, which outgas they're water based, so they outgas very little. Baked coating. So if you're working with wood, in the old days they were oil, right? And they were semi-toxic, but you just oiled your floor. If you're working with wood, if you're working with a urethane wood, let's say, that's a common urethane finish that has a pretty high, they make urethane that goes all the way down to 50 microliters with milligrams per liter. That's very low, and that'll off-gas in 3 days. But some of it's like 500. So you got to be careful about what you're choosing, and you want it baked. So let's just talk. So you refinish your floor, and they bring in a sealer. They're not able to bake it, right? That's the danger point, right? They're laying it down, and you're living in there. You got to make sure there are ways that we can talk about in another podcast, like how do you handle your air when it's bad? Like during building process, I could write a whole book on how to protect yourself during the building process. A lot of people remodel, they're just cutting it off part of their house. They're not moving out. But even if you move back in, right after you finish the house, there's a slew of toxins in there you're going to take in your system and your liver right away. And they used to just turn on the heat and bake the house out. They thought that was good enough. But what if it's summer?
Right.
And you close your house in California. We seal our houses up now because that's what the code says. And they don't breathe. They're horribly toxic. Air's not coming in. Air's not going out. The AC's running. It's not pulling in fresh air. That's why we have so many problems.
This is the biggest pet peeve of my father-in-law, who, building for almost 70 years, 65 years, and the codes and making these houses airtight is just a terrible thing.
It is a terrible idea. It's efficient for energy, but there are better ways for us to use our energy system than, your father-in-law, who I know very well, he was smart enough 35 years ago to use radiant heat in his houses in Reno. I use it now for all my clients. It's brilliant. Why? Because it's low amperage input. It doesn't blow air all around and waste it and rise. It comes from the floor, and it is the least costly and healthy solution you can possibly have because you're not aspirating dust all over your house. You don't need to be blowing heat, and radiant heat, actually, if we talk about heating systems now for a second, the HVAC system, it was generated because it's convenient for people. Oh, I come in, my house can warm up like that. All the heat's up there.
Right.
It's down here, and it's the biggest waste. And it's blowing toxins and air and dust and everything right through you at a higher rate because it's got a vacuum pull. You put in radiant heat. If it's radiant, truly, it heats the objects, like literally, and they make heaters. Like I did my own house. There's heaters. There's some in the United States, but usually they're in Europe, but they are far infrared heat. Well, what is far infrared heat? We use it in saunas. It's an anti-inflammatory.
Right.
So imagine instead of heating with gas where you're blowing shit around and you have off-gassing and it's wasteful, heating something that actually reduces your inflammation in your body and is lower cost. So there's one of my
healthy home. You're living in a sauna.
It's like you're living in a sauna without the humidity.
Right.
So they make radiant heating for flooring, super expensive to do it that way. But he put them in wall heaters. You can also have panel heaters. They're beautiful. They're made out of marble. They look like art, but they run on an amp and a quarter. You have to run, the best way is to run 220 for those in your house when you're building. And that doesn't cost hardly any more, but 220 is so much more efficient. Why we use 110 in the United States is hilarious. People in Europe laugh at us. The pole that comes into your house is 220. It's two 110 legs. And let's just talk about magnetic fields and voltage for a second. When they come in together like that to the house, the one leg's going in, one leg's going back. Okay, that's how it is. And that's what 220 is. It's traveling like this, right? Well, they cancel their magnetic field and their voltage field out because one's positive going one direction and one's negative going the other. Well, what does 110 do? It doesn't have a place to go. There's no cancellation. It comes into your house canceled, but when it gets into your wall, there's no other leg. It's the dumbest energy ever. And that's what's causing our problems. If 220 is super healthy, there's zero magnetic field on 220. You don't even need to run an MC cable. You don't. Wow. So anyway, that's heating. And, I'm
going to go back and just clarify one thing. So just what's the dumb it down on the flooring? You talked about quite a bit of different options on the flooring. What should we consider if we're doing wood? What is kind of the best wood from a cost-effective perspective?
Well, picking the right wood that acclimates to the environment that you're in, right? You don't put eucalyptus flooring in, Hawaii. It'll buckle. You'll come home and it'll be 3 feet off the ground. You have to pick the wood that has the moisture content for where you live. Okay, that's number one. Any wood guy, any wood manufacturer, any wood store will tell you what you use in your house and what not. Typically oak is a really good wood, right? That's why it's hard. It doesn't matter, right? But it's really, so let's just talk about flooring for a second. There's manufactured flooring, engineered flooring, and it can be pretty toxic because it's got glues in it. Solid hardwood can buckle because it doesn't have the strength of a plywood. So engineered floor is a plywood with a veneer, okay? Veneer it can be different thicknesses. It can be a 1/2 inch, an 1/8 inch, whatever it was. It's a wear layer, right? And then it has a sealer on top of it, or a stain and a sealer. So those stains are they're toxic. They're going to outgas through the sealer. So you need a CARB 2 compliant or better sealer. So there are certain companies, and I mean, I like Cali Bamboo. That's one in San Diego, but I mean, there's other companies, but you want to make sure they're using non-toxic sealers and non-toxic stains, because that stain is trapped under that sealer. And then you put that flooring in your house, and for the next 5 years, it's leaking through the porous water-based sealer into your breathing mechanism, right? And you don't know it. You can't smell it necessarily.
Is there a way to identify? So I was definitely big into the wide plank in most of my projects. And then to do wide plank, I would go engineered so it wouldn't buckle. Is there?
They're more toxic.
Yep. So they are more toxic just, by virtue of what they are. And what options do I have as far as like low toxic, low VOC type floors? I mean, would you still go engineered? Like, what did you do in Kauai?
Oh, I put LVL in because in that moisture environment, you didn't want to walk on tile, and wood doesn't belong in Hawaii. It buckles. It's too humid.
Okay, so just if you're, doing the healthiest home you can, I mean, is it LVL? Is that kind of the main option you'd go with?
Oh, no, I think you can do a wood floor in a healthy home. It's just if you're talking cost, healthy and cost at the same time, you got your LVL, and maybe LVL and tile, and you got your wood and tile, right? And so I think that's going up in cost. I think wood is fine. You just, that's where the skill of understanding the materials, because no two wood floors are alike. They are very, very hyper allergen sensitive because of the glues used and because of the sealers used. There are some wood floors out there. I mean, they're insanely expensive though. You start getting into mineral-based stains that have no VOCs. We haven't got into stains and paints yet, but I mean, there are mineral-based. They're made from rock minerals, and therefore the solvents are inherent, and they're beautiful stains, but they don't dry that fast. They're not that, right?
Right.
But they make wood floors with those mineral stains on them, and then a water-based sealer, so it's not trapping anything bad. And you got a water-based sealer that's going to outgas itself. You take it out of the box, it's going to outgas in a week. By the time the people move in, it's fine. That's where I help people decide, because wood floor is a difficult subject you can't really box it in. But you're building a high-end home, there are solutions that are cost-effective. That's why I mentioned Cali Bamboo. They make a bamboo floor that has solid bamboo. Bamboo is awesome. I mean, how hard that is? It's harder than oak. It doesn't buckle, and they have the acrylic sealers on them. They outgas in a day, and they're, $4 a foot. So, I mean, there are, and that's just one suggestion. I'm just saying there's tons of flooring that can be cost effective, that can be healthy.
So we should probably wrap it up. What do we got left? Paint
and stain. I just kind of went, so paints and stains, I'll do this quickly. Water-based paints are not all alike. They have VOCs. The government created a zero VOC list, and then toluene was the big chemical they wanted out of it. But I'm telling you that they created a zero VOC list with the chemical industry that didn't get out all the chemicals. So they put a list together and said, if you have everything on this list, you're zero VOC. And I can measure VOCs on them because these other chemicals are still in there. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So they're not created equal. And I would stay away from anything in any big box store that says zero VOC paints. The Glidden's, the Bears, they don't come out great. Benjamin Moore makes a paint called Ben, B-E-N. I've talked to the chemists there over all the years. I used to have one called Natura that was plant-based, zero VOC for real. This has the lowest VOCs, and literally within a day, that paint outgasses. One day, gone. No smell, no VOCs. And it's middle priced. It's like $47 a gallon. In paint, paint $65 a gallon. You can save yourself thousands of dollars using that paint, and it's a beautiful paint. So That's my suggestion in paint. Sealers, stains, big thing. If you're doing stains by hand in the house, they need to be mineral-based because the solvents in the stain are really toxic. And then when you cover them with a sealer, they're trapped. So they're going to outgas slowly. Make sense? You just put plastic on top of the stain and it can't get out.
Right.
Fat.
Okay.
So you're going to breathe it. That's how we finish up the house. There's other things to talk about in terms of, ventilation in the house through the roofing to be able to let that airflow that you brought underneath the house through the flooring, which is why LVL and wood flooring is really good because the air will come up in with your windows. It goes out through your roof and your ceiling, and how you ventilate your roof and your attic vents, with solar attic venting up there is crucial to getting the air to travel through and keep airflow through your house, keep the mold levels down. Overhead fans, brilliant.
Okay.
So I'm sure we didn't cover everything, but that's
No, this is great.
Building a house.
No, this is really good. I appreciate it. We'll cut this up into segments. This is all great. I appreciate the time again, Bo. This is, like I said, I mean, obviously this is kind of near and dear to my heart just because I've dealt with sleep issues and various little health things here and there. So you helped me a lot just in my sleep environment here at my house. And that's what kind of prompted this discussion. And honestly, I didn't know that you went this deep in all the various areas in creating this healthy home. So anyway, everybody can find, so it's Bo Stevens. You can all find Bo at SCG, that stands for Stevens Consulting Group, but it's scghealthybuilding.com. And on that site, you can go there and you can set up a consultation with Bo directly. I'm going to have some show notes to where we'll go through some of the sources and strategies we talked about. I'm sure we'll have a follow-up because there's always, more to talk about. Name of the company is SCG Healthy Living. And should people go find you anywhere else, or is that kind of the primary?
That's it. That's the best way. The actual company is named SCG Healthy Building, but for some reason, my guy that designed my web architect just put that moniker on there, and it's been there for 10 years, but it's SCG Healthy Building. It's Stevens Consulting Group, and it's our Healthy Building division.
Okay, great. So that's it for now. Thanks for your time.
It's great seeing you, Rod. Thanks again.
You too. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Well, we covered a lot of stuff in that podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And some of it got a little deep, maybe more than you wanted to know, but hopefully it'll help you in your real estate business in the future. And if anyone's just into living a healthier life or dealing with any kind of chronic illness issues, hopefully that'll help. And I just want to let you know, you can find Bo Stevens. His company is SCG Healthy Living. SCG stands for Stevens Consulting Group. And you can find him online at scghealthybuilding.com. Feel free to look him up there. He is, like you mentioned, he's just very open. He's helping people deal with some of the bad things that are in our homes as far as affecting human health. And by the way, as far as this podcast, depending on where you listen to it, you can always find us on our YouTube channel at the Optimized Real Estate Podcast YouTube channel. And then I post everything on my personal website, which is rod-wilson.com. And that's it for now. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.